You're listening to an exclusive audiobook recording, The Glass Veil, a dark romance by Vivian Black. Like and subscribe for more content.
Chapter 1: The Collapse of Perfection. The rhythmic hum of the scaffolding lifts, a low thrum against the morning chill, was music to Olivia Harper. It spoke of order, of meticulous execution. Below her, the city sprawled, a chaotic expanse she spent her life trying to rein in. From her vantage point on the 30th floor, overseeing the nascent skeleton of the Renwick Tower, she felt a familiar surge of satisfaction. Each beam, each rivet, a direct extension of her will. She adjusted the hard hat, a familiar weight, her eyes scanning the blueprints clutched in her gloved hand. A hairline deviation in a cantilever. She pointed it out to her foreman, a man who knew her standards, and watched him nod, already moving to correct it. This was her world, built brick by painstaking brick. A stronghold of logic, designed by her. Later that afternoon, the polished steel and cool glass of her penthouse office offered a different kind of serenity. Ilara, her assistant, moved with efficient grace, sorting through a stack of contracts. "The council meeting for the waterfront project is pushed to next Tuesday, Olivia," Ilara announced, her voice a calm counterpoint to the city's distant roar. Olivia merely nodded, already reviewing the latest structural integrity reports for Renwick, a faint pulse of contentment in her chest. Everything was on schedule, flawless, just as she liked it. She reached for her tea, the ceramic mug warm against her fingers, when her phone buzzed, an insistent, unfamiliar vibration. It wasn't a client, nor Marcus. The caller ID was just a string of numbers. She hesitated, a prickle of unease, before answering. Why the unknown call? A cold lead, perhaps? Or a misdial? Yet the persistent buzz felt wrong. "Olivia, have you seen the news?" The voice on the other end, Julian, a former colleague from her university days, was taut with urgency. It grated on her nerves. Olivia frowned, glancing at the muted news channel playing silently on the large screen embedded in her office wall. It was usually set to a financial channel, a quiet backdrop to her work. Nothing seemed amiss. "What news, Julian?" she asked, her tone cool, though a sudden prickle of apprehension traced its way up her spine. "Just turn up the volume. Channel 5. Did you hear me?" "I heard you. What is it?" Her fingers hovered over the remote, a strange reluctance holding her back. Julian's tone had sharpened, cutting through her practiced calm. A cold tightening began to form in Olivia's stomach. She picked up the remote, her fingers feeling strangely clumsy, and pressed the volume button. The anchor's voice, usually a smooth drone, now cut through the office quiet with a breathless intensity. A graphic flashed across the screen, a corporate logo she recognized instantly, followed by a picture of Marcus. Not the confident, smiling Marcus she knew, but a grim, grainy image. "Breaking news," the anchor began, her voice grave. "Sources confirm the sudden disappearance of prominent businessman Marcus Harper, CEO of Harper Holdings, amidst a burgeoning scandal involving allegations of widespread corruption, embezzlement, and illicit dealings." The word struck Olivia like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. The screen flashed again, showing her own firm's logo, then a headline screaming, "Harper Empire crumbles, architectural firm implicated." Her perfect life, meticulously constructed, began to splinter, piece by agonizing piece. The phone slipped from her numb fingers, clattering unheard to the floor. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city lights, once a promise, now seemed to mock her, cold and indifferent. Marcus. Disappeared. Corruption. The words echoed in her mind, a relentless, deafening chant. She still couldn't believe it, wouldn't. There had to be a mistake. He was Marcus. He was untouchable. The thought of ordering takeout, of anything normal, vanished, crushed by the tightening grip of reality, squeezing the air from her lungs. The last frantic ring of her phone died, leaving behind a silence far more profound than the chaos that preceded it. It wasn't merely the absence of sound, it was a heavy, suffocating presence. Olivia Harper was left standing in the ruins of her opulent apartment, utterly alone, the future a terrifying, uncharted blank. Chapter 2: A Vengeful Proposal. The silence of the apartment was no longer a comfort, it just pressed in. Each tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, once a symbol of timeless elegance, now felt like a countdown. Each second chipped away at Olivia's dwindling hope. She sat at her polished mahogany desk, the same surface where she'd once sketched dreams into blueprints. Now it was cluttered with a single defunct phone and a stack of unpaid bills. Her fingers, usually steady and precise, trembled slightly as she dialed another number. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor. A polite, yet undeniably cold, voice answered, then quickly diverted to voicemail. It was the third such rejection in an hour, the 10th since morning. Each automated tone, each clipped message echoed the same sentiment. The doors were closed. The world Olivia had so meticulously built was actively shutting her out. A chill settled deep in her bones, a cold that had nothing to do with the unheated rooms. She tried another contact, a former client, a man whose gleaming corporate headquarters she had personally designed. This time, the call didn't even connect. The number had been blocked. The reality of her isolation hit her like a physical blow. Harper Architectural, her firm, was a ghost. Its future dissolved with every unanswered call. The spacious, minimalist office, once a hub of creative energy, now felt like a mausoleum. Olivia walked through it later that day, the echoes of her own footsteps unnervingly loud against the polished concrete. Empty desks, switched-off monitors, silent plotters, each a stark reminder of what was gone. She ran a hand over the cool surface of her own drafting table, a wave of profound weariness washing over her. What was left? Nothing but a ruined reputation and the heavy weight of public scorn. She wondered, briefly, if the janitor would still come next week. Probably not. The thought felt like another small defeat. The last sliver of late afternoon sun bled through the panoramic windows, casting long, stark shadows across the deserted space. From the elevator, a figure emerged. He moved with a quiet, almost unsettling efficiency, his tailored suit a dark counterpoint to the fading light. Julian Reese. Olivia recognized him immediately from the countless magazine profiles, the hushed whispers of his empire. He was a legend in the cutthroat world of construction magnates, a man known for building monuments and legends with equal ruthlessness. His gaze, when it found hers, was unsettlingly direct, assessing. It felt as if he were already sizing up the structural weaknesses of her life. He didn't speak. He simply allowed his eyes to trace the lines of her face, the faint shadows under her eyes, the defiant set of her jaw. "Ms. Harper," he finally said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to fill the vast emptiness of the office. "I believe you're in need of a new foundation." Olivia bristled, a spark of her old pride igniting. The audacity, the sheer, calculated insolence of the man. Her initial shock gave way to a sharp jab of indignation. She had heard the rumors about Reese, his ruthless business practices, his penchant for acquiring distressed assets and turning them into colossal profits. But to approach her, now in her moment of deepest vulnerability, felt like a blatant insult. She could feel the blood rising in her cheeks. He gestured to the only 2 chairs left in the office, salvaged from her private consultation area. "May we speak?" he asked, though it sounded more like a command. Olivia, despite her anger, found herself nodding. A desperate, pragmatic part of her recognized that this was the first door that hadn't slammed shut in her face. Her throat felt suddenly dry. As they sat, the air in the room grew thick, heavy with unspoken things. Julian leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his eyes never leaving hers. "My offer is simple," he began, his tone flat, devoid of any false sympathy. "I'm willing to finance your projects, provide you with the resources to rebuild Harper Architectural under my banner." The words hung in the air, cold and precise. Olivia felt a hot flush creep up her neck. Under his banner? It was less a partnership and more a takeover, a surrender of the autonomy she had always fiercely protected. "And what, precisely, would you expect in return, Mr. Reese?" she asked, her voice betraying none of the turmoil churning within her. His lips curved into a faint, humorless smile. "Justice, Miss Harper, a very specific kind of justice." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. "Your husband, Marcus, was a predator. Years ago, he systematically dismantled my family's construction firm, Reese and Sons. He used every dirty trick in the book: corporate espionage, manipulated bids, fabricated legal challenges, until we had nothing left but a name and a mountain of debt." Julian's eyes, usually cool and remote, now held a flicker of something ancient and dangerous, a deep, unwavering resolve. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with the ghost of past wrongs. Olivia felt a sickening lurch in her stomach. Marcus, her Marcus, the man she thought she knew, the man who had built their life on a foundation of respectability and ambition. Could he truly be capable of such calculated cruelty? The idea was repellent, yet a seed of doubt, planted by the sheer weight of Julian's conviction, began to take root. Her hands, resting on her knees, felt clammy. "This isn't about me, Mr. Reese," she managed, her voice tight. "This is about your vendetta. I won't be a pawn in your game of revenge." Julian merely tilted his head, his gaze unwavering. "On the contrary, Miss Harper, this is very much about you. Your husband left you with nothing but disgrace. I am offering you a path back, a chance to reclaim your name, and, perhaps, to understand the true nature of the man you married." He leaned back slightly, a silent challenge in his posture. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Olivia's mind raced. She saw her frozen bank accounts, heard the creditors calling, felt the sneering judgment of former colleagues. The looming threat of losing everything she had ever worked for pressed in. Pride, ethics. She swallowed hard, the muscles in her throat tight. They felt like luxuries she could no longer afford. A tremor went through her, a surrender she hadn't known she was capable of. "What are your—" Tanya held her gaze for another long moment, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, before he slowly withdrew his hand. He rose, his dark silhouette against the fading light, and moved towards the elevator. As the doors hissed shut, Olivia was left alone once more. The silence that followed was not empty, but charged. It hummed with a dangerous new energy, a vengeful promise that settled deep in her bones. She had traded her integrity for a chance at redemption, and the path ahead felt stark, unyielding. She could already sense the cool, heavy air of it, the low, steady thrum of the world she was now bound to enter. Chapter 3. Stepping into the Gray. The polished brass plaque outside Julian Reese's building offered no name, only a stylized, almost brutalist R embossed above a discreet numerical address. Olivia Harper paused. Her reflection, a pale, almost translucent ghost, shimmered in the darkened glass, a stark contrast to the gleaming, transparent towers that had once been her professional home. The building itself was a block of deep, unpolished stone and smoked glass, a defiant presence amidst the shimmering chrome and steel of the surrounding financial district. Taking a deep breath, Olivia pushed open the heavy, unmarked door. It groaned softly, a sound swallowed by the city's hum, and she stepped from the familiar, if now hostile, sunlight into a cool, shadowed interior. The air was still, thick with an unspoken promise of change. The lobby wasn't the opulent marble expanse she was used to. This was industrial minimalism, exposed concrete, burnished metal, and lighting so sparse it carved long, dramatic shadows across the floor. A single, oddly vibrant green fern sat on a concrete plinth, looking utterly out of place. It reminded her, for a fleeting second, of the plastic plant in her childhood dentist's waiting room, a mundane detail in an increasingly surreal landscape. The air hummed with a low, almost imperceptible thrum, a sound that felt both modern and ancient, like something vast and alive, breathing deep beneath the city. A lone figure, sharp-eyed and dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, emerged from behind a sleek, unadorned reception desk. "Miss Harper," the man said, his voice smooth, devoid of inflection. "Mr. Reese is expecting you." He gestured towards a set of elevators, their doors a seamless expanse of brushed steel. A prickle of unease traced its way up Olivia's spine. Her stomach gave a faint, nervous flutter. This wasn't just a different office. It was a different ecosystem entirely, one she wasn't sure she was equipped to navigate. The elevator ascended in near silence, a swift, unnerving climb that left her ears popping. She pressed a finger to her ear, trying to clear the pressure. When the doors finally parted, she found herself on a floor that was less an office and more a command center. Walls of glass overlooked a sprawling cityscape. The view felt less like an invitation and more like a challenge, a declaration of dominion over everything below. Julian Reese stood by the window, his back to her, a stark silhouette against the urban sprawl. His broad shoulders and imposing height seemed to fill the vast space with a quiet, almost physical intensity. He turned slowly, his gaze sweeping over her, assessing, unreadable. "Olivia," he acknowledged, his voice a low rumble that resonated through the quiet room. "Welcome to the other side." A spark of defiance flared within her. "I prefer to think of it as a temporary detour, Mr. Reese." A faint, almost imperceptible smirk touched his lips. Detours often become the main road, given enough time. "Please, have a seat." He gestured to a pair of chairs facing his imposing desk, a massive slab of deep, unreflective wood. As she sat, Olivia noticed the subtle hum of unseen machinery, a familiar, deep thrum beneath the floorboards. The faint scent of old leather, something metallic, almost ozone-like, hung in the air. Like a storm was brewing, she thought, a shiver running down her spine, and for once, she didn't try to dismiss it. Julian settled into his own chair, leaning back, his eyes never leaving hers. "I understand you've had a difficult week. That ends now." He paused, letting his words hang in the air, heavy with unspoken weight. "Here, we build, and sometimes we deconstruct." A veiled threat, a promise. Olivia considered them, a cold dread settling in her stomach. What kind of building or deconstruction did he truly mean? And what part of her would be dismantled in the process? "I'm an architect, Mr. Reese," Olivia stated, her voice firm, a desperate anchor to her former identity. "I build structures, ethical ones." He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Ethics are luxuries, Olivia. Foundations are necessities, and sometimes the strongest foundations are laid in the shadows." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "Your first project will be the Phoenix, a residential complex currently stalled due to unforeseen complications." He slid a folder across the polished desk, its weight thudding softly. Olivia opened the folder, her gaze scanning the schematics. The design was ambitious, elegant, bearing the unmistakable hallmark of her old firm's aesthetic, a design she recognized, with a pang, as one Marcus had championed. "These complications wouldn't happen to be of your making, would they, Mr. Reese?" she asked, her voice carefully level. His eyes narrowed, a glint of something dangerous surfacing in their depths. "Let's just say I have a knack for finding leverage where others see only obstacles." He leaned back, the gesture casual, yet utterly commanding. "Your task is to untangle the bureaucratic knots, navigate the local council, and ensure construction resumes within 3 months, by any means necessary." "By any means?" Olivia echoed, her stomach clenching. A wave of apprehension washed over her, a cold certainty of the moral compromises she might be forced to make. The very thought tasted like ash. "Within the bounds of discretion, of course," Julian clarified, his tone laced with sarcasm. "You'll find my network extensive, my methods efficient. You'll have a team. They understand how things truly work in this metropolis. Listen to them. Learn." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "This isn't about blueprints anymore, Olivia. It's about influence, power, and sometimes knowing which strings to pull and which ones to cut." A beat of silence stretched between them. Over the next few days, Olivia was introduced to Julian's team, a sharp-edged collection of lawyers, ex-fixers, and strategists who operated with quiet, almost unnerving precision. They worked in a sprawling, open-plan space, the atmosphere humming with a low-level intensity that was both exhilarating and unsettling. She met Victor, a legal counsel with a reputation for finding loopholes where none existed, and Anya, a logistics expert who seemed to have an uncanny ability to procure anything, from rare materials to critical information at a moment's notice. "So, Miss Harper," Victor drawled, a cynical smirk playing on his lips, "ready to learn how things really get done." Olivia forced a tight smile. "I prefer to focus on the end product, Mr. Antonov." "The end product is often the muck sometimes," Anya interjected, her gaze sharp, cutting Victor off mid-breath. "You can't build a monument without understanding its foundations." Olivia felt a growing frustration, a sense of being caught in a web she didn't understand. The Phoenix project, as Julian had described, was indeed a tangled mess. Permits were stalled, environmental reports suddenly contested, and a minor historical preservation society had inexplicably found a protected species of beetle on the construction site. Olivia knew, instinctively, these weren't genuine obstacles, but manufactured ones. Julian, however, offered no direct instructions on how to unmanufacture them. He merely observed, occasionally dropping a cryptic comment or a knowing glance that seemed to demand she figure it out herself. Her stomach growled, a sharp reminder of the lunch she'd skipped, a small, mundane protest against the complexities she now faced. One afternoon, she found herself poring over zoning maps, frustrated by the labyrinthine regulations. Julian appeared silently in her doorway, a tall shadow against the bright office lights. A city's regulations are like an architect's drawings, Olivia, he said, his voice soft, almost a murmur. They tell you what should be. But the true design is often found in the margins, in the interpretations, in what you can make others believe is true. Olivia looked up, a spark of something new igniting within her, both unsettling and compelling. Are you suggesting I reinterpret the rules? I'm suggesting you understand their flexibility, he corrected, his gaze intense, holding hers. The world isn't black and white, Olivia. It's gray. And in the gray, there are endless possibilities. He held her gaze for a long moment, a silent challenge passing between them. There was a current, undeniable, of something more than professional interest. Olivia felt a strange pull, a dangerous fascination with the man who navigated these depths with such ease. It was unsettling, this feeling, like standing too close to a precipice. The uncertainty settled over her, a long, quiet pall. It clung to her thoughts, a damp chill she couldn't shake. The invitation arrived discreetly via Anya. Mr. Reese requests your presence tonight, 9 p.m., the Blackstone Lounge. Olivia dressed in a sleek, deep-hued dress, the silk cool against her skin, feeling a strange mix of apprehension and anticipation. The Blackstone Lounge was not a place she would have frequented in her old life. It was tucked away in a discreet corner of the city's financial district, its entrance a single, unmarked door of polished black wood. Inside, the air was thick with cigar smoke and the low murmur of powerful voices. Dim lighting, rich leather, and polished deep wood created a sense of clandestine luxury. It was a little too warm, the kind of heat that made you want to loosen your collar, to shed the layers of pretense. Julian was already there, seated at a secluded, raised booth, surrounded by a handful of men whose faces Olivia vaguely recognized from financial news, powerful, ruthless figures. He motioned for her to join them. As she slid into the booth beside him, the conversation didn't pause. It flowed around her, a torrent of numbers, deals, and veiled threats. Julian, at the center, orchestrated it all with an unnerving calm. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried immense weight, shifting alliances, sealing fates. Olivia watched him, captivated, a dangerous admiration stirring within her. This was his world, raw and unapologetic. He was brutal, efficient, utterly in control. One of the men, a corpulent developer with a perpetually sneering expression, leaned forward. So, Reese, this is the architect whose husband vanished? Word is she's a liability. Julian's gaze flickered to the man, cold and sharp, a predator's warning. Word is often wrong, Mr. Vance. Miss Harper is an asset, and she's under my protection. His tone left no room for argument, a silent warning delivered with chilling precision. The developer visibly recoiled, a flush creeping up his neck. Olivia felt a jolt. Protection? From whom? From what? She looked at Julian, and his eyes, dark and intense, met hers across the table. Standing by her window, looking out at the metropolis, the image of Julian's controlled power, his quiet menace, replayed in her mind. She could almost hear his voice, cool and precise, outlining the impossible demands he would soon place upon her. A knot of apprehension tightened in her stomach, but beneath it, a strange, unfamiliar thrill pulsed. She had stepped into the gray, and the line between survival and surrender, between her old self and this new, dangerous version of her, was blurring with every passing moment. She knew he would ask her to build something she never thought possible, something that would challenge every principle Olivia Harper, the architect, once held sacred. The question wasn't if she could do it, but how much of herself she would lose in the process. Chapter 4: The Architect of Shadows. The holographic display flickered, projecting the blueprints of the Aether Tower site onto the scarred surface of Julian's conference table. The air in the room was stale, heavy with the scent of old paper and ambition. Olivia's gaze traced the intricate lines, not merely of a building, but of a labyrinthine problem. It was the kind her old firm would have summarily dismissed as unviable, a structural nightmare tangled with ethical barbed wire. Julian had given her this project with a simple, almost casual directive: find a way. A familiar knot tightened in her stomach. The ethical quandaries coiled around the structural challenges, a dense thicket of zoning loopholes and permit ambiguities. It screamed for a solution she'd been trained her entire life to avoid, one that felt inherently wrong. For days she wrestled with it. Her usual meticulous approach, honed over years of designing award-winning structures, felt like trying to pick a lock with a sledgehammer. She buried herself in the work, driven by a desperate need to prove herself, to survive. Her makeshift desk in the annex Julian had provided was buried under municipal codes, historical land deeds, and obscure environmental impact reports. The stark overhead lighting hummed, a constant, low reminder of her abrupt fall from grace. Every conventional avenue led to a dead end, a brick wall of bureaucracy or outright illegality. Her jaw ached from clenching it, a sharp throb beginning behind her eyes. The mental gymnastics Julian expected felt less like problem-solving and more like contortion. Outside, the city was a blur of gray, rain drumming a monotonous rhythm against the glass. Days bled into nights. One evening, as the city lights began to prickle through the rain-streaked windows, a thought, insidious and compelling, began to form. She was so tired she almost missed it. It wasn't about breaking the rules, not exactly. More like finding the hairline fractures in the legal framework and prying them open. She pulled up an old Urban Renewal Act, a forgotten clause from decades ago, a relic that, if interpreted precisely, could offer a narrow, precarious path forward. The idea was audacious, risky, and, she had to admit, brilliant in its subversion. A shiver, not entirely of dread, ran down her spine. This was the kind of ingenuity Marcus had always admired, a cunning she had, until now, suppressed in favor of pure, unblemished integrity. Ilara's worried voice on the phone was a distant echo of her old life, a reminder of the ethical lines she was now blurring. Did I remember to feed the cat this morning? The thought flashed, then vanished. It's for survival, she told herself, a temporary measure. But a part of her, a newly awakened, ambitious part, felt a strange, exhilarating rush. And a pang of something else, too. Guilt? No, not exactly. More like a cold curiosity, a fascination with the dark edges of her own capability. She worked through the night, fueled by lukewarm coffee and a growing sense of defiant purpose. Her stomach rumbled, a forgotten sensation. The office was silent, save for the hum of her laptop and the occasional drip from the leaky faucet in the kitchenette. The solution she crafted was an architectural sleight of hand, a design that leveraged historical context and overlooked municipal definitions to bypass the most restrictive regulations. It was a dark masterpiece, really, a testament to her skill, yes, but also to a new kind of ruthlessness. legal interpretation, structural innovation, all bent to her will. When dawn finally broke, painting the skyline in hues of bruised purple and gray, Olivia leaned back, her shoulders stiff. Exhaustion warred with a quiet sense of triumph. She had found her way, but the path had irrevocably shifted beneath her feet, and she wasn't sure if she liked the new view. With the solution complete, the meeting with Julian was set for late morning. Olivia arrived punctually, the carefully prepared presentation files clutched in her hand. The air in his sleek, minimalist office always felt charged, thick with unspoken power and the scent of expensive leather. And something else, too, a faint metallic tang, like old coins. Julian sat behind his vast, polished desk, an unreadable expression on his face. Or maybe it was just her inability to read him. He gestured for her to begin, his silence more potent than any command. She almost dropped her files. Olivia's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of anticipation and trepidation. She took a breath, tried to steady it. She launched into her presentation, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She laid out the problem, the conventional dead ends, and then, with a controlled flourish, unveiled her unconventional solution. She paused, maybe a beat too long, catching Julian's eye for a fraction of a second. He gave nothing away. She detailed the obscure legal precedents, the creative reinterpretation of property boundaries, the strategic phasing of construction that would allow them to sidestep the most prohibitive ordinances. It was all there, laid bare. Every word was precise, every argument airtight. A fragile edifice, yes, but one built on the very edge of legality, and she knew it would hold. She watched Julian's face for any flicker of reaction, disapproval, surprise, anything. He just stared, unblinking, like a statue carved from dark rock. When she finished, a profound silence descended, broken only by the hum of the city far below, and the frantic thrumming in her own ears. Olivia held her breath, the weight of his judgment pressing down on her. Had she gone too far? Not far enough? Her throat felt tight. Julian leaned forward slightly, his gaze piercing. He picked up a pen, then put it down again. Then, a subtle shift at the corner of his mouth, barely perceptible, a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Was that approval, or just acknowledgement? "Clever, Miss Harper," he said, his voice a low murmur that seemed to fill the vast room. "Very clever." The words were simple, yet they resonated. It wasn't praise, not in the traditional sense, but an acknowledgement, a validation of her foray into his world of shadows. A complex mix of relief and a quiet, unsettling triumph washed over Olivia. Like a cold drink after a long run, but with a strange aftertaste she couldn't quite place. As Olivia walked out of Julian's office, the city outside seemed to pulse with a new, darker energy, echoing the change within. The sense of accomplishment was undeniable, a potent drug, but it was laced with a quiet unease, a cold thread of realization. Julian's empire, she knew, wasn't built solely on gleaming towers and pristine new construction. His influence extended to the quiet acquisition of forgotten spaces, the reclamation of crumbling histories. She had crossed a line, not just for survival, but for the thrill of the challenge, for the satisfaction of her own ingenuity. The architect of perfection was gone, replaced by something far more complex, far more dangerous. There was no turning back now. The foundations of her new life were being laid, brick by morally ambiguous brick, in the shadows. and a small, unsettling part of her was undeniably excited to see what neglected corner of his world she would be tasked with next. Chapter 5. Whispers of the Past. The stale air in the Harper Industries annex clung to Olivia, thick and oppressive. It smelled of dust and the coppery tang of old coins. This crumbling structure was Julian's latest acquisition, an office block Marcus had once held a significant stake in, now slated for demolition and redevelopment. Olivia ran a gloved hand over a grimy windowsill. A shiver worked its way up her spine, not entirely from the chill seeping through the broken panes. Her stomach rumbled, a quiet protest against the early start. She really should have grabbed something more than coffee. The silence here felt heavy, almost suffocating, a jarring counterpoint to the gleaming, pristine towers she usually inhabited. Her initial brief from Julian had been simple: assess structural integrity, identify salvageable elements, and prepare preliminary design concepts. Yet as she moved through the echoing halls, a different kind of curiosity began to prick at her. This building, neglected as it was, still showed glimpses of Marcus's original design philosophy in its modernist lines, a style he'd abandoned years ago for flashier, more contemporary trends. She paused before a large framed abstract painting, its colors muted. Behind it, a subtle unevenness in the wall, a faint, almost imperceptible seam, hinted at something more than just a poorly hung piece of art. Or maybe she was just seeing things, her mind already primed for secrets. She wondered if the old Harper himself had picked out the hideous carpet in the lobby. It reminded her of the garish floral pattern her grandmother had insisted on in the guest bathroom. Later that evening, a message from Julian pinged on her secure device. It was terse, as always, asking about the unforeseen challenges of the annex. Olivia knew it was his subtle way of acknowledging her private inquiry. Julian rarely asked direct questions. He preferred to create opportunities and watch. A familiar jolt, a mix of dread and a strange, almost shameful thrill ran through her. She almost typed a reply, then hesitated, her thumb hovering over the screen. What would she even say? Yes, I'm breaking into your latest acquisition. Thanks for the permission. The next morning, armed with a small toolkit and a stubborn determination, Olivia returned to the annex. The air felt even colder than yesterday, a damp chill promising rain. Her nose was starting to run, just a little. Her hands were already cold, despite the gloves. She should have brought thicker ones. The early light filtered weakly through the dust-streaked windows, casting long, wavering shadows. She bypassed the main offices, heading straight for the executive suite Marcus had once used. It was a space now stripped bare, save for the phantom imprint of furniture on the carpet. The painting was still hanging there, a garish canvas of muted hues. She carefully removed it, revealing the faint fissure again. Her fingers traced the outline, feeling for a catch, a release, anything that would betray its secret. It took longer than she anticipated. Marcus had always been good at hiding things. She tried different angles, different pressures, her mind racing, a jumble of schematics and frustrated guesses. Her back was starting to ache. Just as a sigh of defeat was already forming in her throat, her thumb brushed against a barely perceptible indentation in the plasterwork, disguised as part of the decorative molding. A tiny bit of plaster flaked off under her touch. A soft click echoed in the hushed space, shockingly loud in the stillness. She jumped. A section of the wall, no larger than a compact safe, swung inward on silent hinges, revealing a dark recess. The air inside smelled even older, like trapped time. Olivia's breath hitched. Inside, nestled amongst cobwebs and decades of dust, wasn't cash or jewels, but a petite leather-bound ledger and a handful of sealed envelopes, yellowed with age. The leather felt surprisingly smooth beneath her fingertips, almost cool. A primal dread settled deep in her bones, a feeling that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. This was it. The past finally laid bare. She carefully extracted the ledger, its pages brittle, and the envelopes. The ledger was filled with cryptic entries, dates, and names, none of which made immediate sense. But the pattern, even without understanding the specifics, was deeply unsettling. One of the envelopes, unsealed, contained a single, grainy photograph of a man she vaguely recognized from faded society pages. A minor politician, long out of the public eye, alongside a copy of what appeared to be a signed confession. Not a financial crime, but something far more personal. Blackmail, she realized, a sickening twist in her gut. Marcus hadn't just been amassing an empire. He'd been weaving a complex web of control, a network of secrets. A shiver coursed through her, despite the warmth of her apartment. The ledger and envelopes, spread across her dining table, solidified the weight of Marcus's deception. Each cryptic entry, each name, was a thread in a tapestry of manipulation she was only just beginning to unravel. The man she had married, the man she had loved, felt like a stranger now, his memory a cold, hollow ache. A notification flashed on her screen, an encrypted message from Julian. He didn't ask what she'd found, only if she needed additional resources for her research. This wasn't a question, but an invitation, an acknowledgement of the dangerous path she now walked. Olivia looked from the stack of damning evidence to her own reflection in the darkened window, a ghost staring back, hair disheveled, eyes shadowed by exhaustion and a dawning resolve. She knew, with an unyielding certainty, she couldn't stop now. The truth, however devastating, was hers to uncover, and Julian's offer, however unsettling, was the only way forward. She typed a single affirmative reply, sealing a pact she knew would demand a price, but one she was now, inexplicably, ready to pay. The game had just begun. Chapter 6. A Dance of Power and Desire. The silk dress clung like a second skin, cool against her collarbones, a defiant emerald armor against the evening's chill. It shimmered, a bold green that mirrored her newfound determination. Olivia stared at her reflection, recognizing herself, yet feeling profoundly disconnected. Her hazel eyes, usually so calm, seemed too wide, betraying a flicker of apprehension, a nascent fire that threatened to consume her composure. Just last night, the hidden compartment and the coded document had solidified her purpose. But tonight, that purpose felt fragile under the weight of anticipated judgment. The pact she'd made pressed down on her like a physical burden. This wasn't merely another industry event. It was a gauntlet, a public display of her new allegiance, a declaration, severing ties with her past, embracing a dangerous future. She smoothed a stray strand of hair, her hands trembling slightly. The thought of facing her former peers, the ones who'd turned their backs, sent a fresh wave of dread through her. Yet a flicker of defiance sparked in her eyes. Their scorn, she realized, fueled a quiet, stubborn strength she hadn't known she possessed. A sharp rap on the door startled her. Her breath hitched. Julian. His punctuality was as unnerving as his presence, a calculated force that demanded attention. She took a deep, fortifying breath, then turned the handle. Julian stood framed in the doorway, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit. His eyes, twin pools of polished jet, swept over her, a slow, appraising look that sent a shiver down her spine. His intensity was a physical thing, a pressure in the air that stole her breath. "Ready?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "As I'll ever be," Olivia replied, her voice steadier than she expected. a mask of composure firmly in place. As the silence stretched, the weight of their history pressed down. The grand ballroom was a dazzling spectacle of light and noise, a stark contrast to the quiet intensity of their car ride. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto polished marble, reflecting a sea of designer gowns and tailored suits, a symphony of hushed conversations and clinking glasses. As they stepped inside, a hush fell over a section of the room. Conversations faltered, heads turned. A ripple of recognition, then shock, spread through the opulent space. Every eye seemed to turn towards them, 100 silent judgments weighing heavily. The collective gasp was almost audible. Olivia felt Julian's hand settle lightly on the small of her back. It was a possessive gesture, one that both steadied and unnerved her, a public claim she had not anticipated. Whispers followed them like a shadow. Olivia caught fragments. Harper's wife, with Reese, no less. Scandalous. The words stung, 1,000 tiny cuts, but she refused to let them break her. She kept her chin high, her spine straightened, her gaze unwavering. Julian, a pillar of calm beside her, merely offered a faint, almost imperceptible smirk as he scanned the room. He led her towards a cluster of influential figures, a calculated move to assert their presence. He navigated the crowded space with practiced ease, a predator moving through his domain. "Good evening, gentlemen," Julian greeted, his voice smooth as aged whiskey, cutting through the murmurs. "Reese, Harper, an unexpected pleasure," one of them drawled, his eyes lingering on Olivia with thinly veiled curiosity. Olivia offered a polite, if strained, smile, feeling the unspoken questions in their averted gazes. The forced pleasantries felt like a performance, her palms growing slick under the scrutiny. Across the room, she noticed Elara, her former assistant. Elara's eyes were wide with a mixture of concern and disbelief, her face pale as parchment, her hand flying to her mouth. The sight twisted a knot in Olivia's stomach, a sharp reminder of the collateral damage of her choices. Julian engaged in a terse, almost predatory conversation with a rival developer, his words laced with subtle threats and promises. "Your new project is ambitious, Mr. Vance," Julian purred, a dangerous edge beneath the cordiality, "but perhaps a little too ambitious for your current capital. Unless, of course, you're open to partnerships." Olivia observed him, a strange mix of apprehension and grudging admiration stirring within her. She watched him, a chilling fascination taking root, recognizing the ruthless efficiency of his power. He moved through this world like a shark, utterly at home, a master of this intricate dance. She, on the other hand, felt like she was constantly holding her breath, a pawn in a game she barely understood. For a fleeting second, her mind drifted, wondering if the caterers had remembered the vegan options she'd requested for her own launch party months ago. The evening wore on, a relentless parade of forced smiles and veiled hostilities. The air grew thick with cigar smoke and expensive perfume, the hours blurring into a dizzying tableau of power plays and veiled threats. Olivia found herself settling into the discomfort, a strange resilience blooming. A calm detachment settled over her, allowing her to observe rather than merely react. She even managed a few brief, superficial conversations, expertly deflecting any probes about Marcus. "The market is certainly volatile," she offered to a financier, sidestepping his thinly veiled question about her husband's disappearance. Just as she thought she might find a moment's reprieve, a shadow fell over her. It brought with it the cloying scent of cheap cologne and a voice that grated on her nerves. "Well, well, if it isn't the disgraced architect," Dominic Hayes drawled, stepping into her peripheral vision. His smirk was a cruel slash across his face, his eyes glinting with malicious satisfaction. I heard you'd fallen on hard times, but slumming it with Reese. That's a new low, even for you, Harper. Or should I say, ex-Harper? A cold fury ignited in Olivia, a primal urge to strike back. But before she could formulate a retort, Julian's hand, previously resting lightly on her back, moved to her waist. His fingers pressed firmly, a subtle but unmistakable claim. He stepped closer, his body language a silent, lethal warning that made Dominic flinch almost imperceptibly. Mr. Hayes. Julian's voice was dangerously quiet, a silken threat. Olivia Harper is my partner, and her choices are no longer your concern. The air crackled with unspoken tension, a palpable threat hanging heavy between the men. Dominic's face flushed, his bravado crumbling under Julian's unwavering predatory stare. Just making an observation, Dominic mumbled, backing away a step, his eyes wide with sudden apprehension. Make no mistake, Julian continued, his voice hardening, each word a hammer blow. Any further observations regarding Miss Harper will be considered an attack on my interests, and you wouldn't want that, would you? Dominic's eyes darted between Julian's unyielding gaze and Olivia's defiant stance, fear finally eclipsing his arrogance. He gave a curt nod, a pathetic shadow of his former bluster, and quickly melted back into the crowd, defeated. Olivia turned to Julian, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of adrenaline and something else entirely, something new and unsettling. His eyes, dark and intense, held hers, a silent challenge and a dangerous promise. In that moment, surrounded by fading whispers and the glittering facade of the event, an undeniable current of raw, electric attraction surged between them, hot and dangerous. It was a silent conversation, a shared understanding of power, defiance, and a desire that felt both forbidden and utterly inevitable, a spark igniting a brush fire. His thumb brushed lightly against her hip, a feather-light touch that scorched her skin, sending a jolt through her. A gasp caught in her throat, a silent acknowledgement of the unexpected heat. The intensity of the moment lingered, a palpable hum in the air around them, charged with unspoken desires. Julian's hand remained on her waist, a silent anchor in the turbulent sea of her emotions, a possessive weight. "Thank you," Olivia murmured, her voice barely a whisper, thick with a gratitude she hadn't anticipated. "He knows his place now," Julian replied, his gaze steady. The cool night air hit her face, a welcome shock after the stifling heat of the room and the even greater heat that had ignited between her and Julian. The echoes of whispers and the phantom touch of his hand on her hip lingered, leaving Olivia breathless and profoundly conflicted about the treacherous desires now stirring within her. The dangerous game, she realized, had just begun its most perilous descent. She knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified her, that the quiet before the storm was about to break. She was irrevocably bound to him, and the chaos that surely awaited them would demand everything she had. Chapter 7. The Unforgiving Midpoint. The phone ripped through the pre-dawn stillness, a sharp, insistent ring that yanked Olivia from a restless sleep. Her hand fumbled for the receiver, heart already thrumming, a frantic beat against her ribs. Julian's voice came through, calm but edged with a tight, dangerous tension she'd learned to recognize. "They hit us," he said, without preamble. The words were a cold splash. The deal for the waterfront property, sabotaged, completely. Legal challenges, environmental violations, a whole raft of fabricated nonsense. It's dead in the water. Olivia sat bolt upright, the last tendrils of sleep dissolving. Her mind, usually so precise, felt like a scrambled mess, a radio dial stuck between stations. This wasn't just a setback. This was an attack, a direct, calculated blow. She dressed quickly, the silk of her blouse feeling thin, a poor defense against the sudden chill that raised goosebumps on her arms. The air in her apartment felt suddenly cold, heavy. She hadn't even had coffee yet, and already the day was a disaster. The weight of their situation settled over her like a lead shroud. Olivia, still half-dressed, made her way to Julian's office. Julian's penthouse office, usually a bastion of cool, controlled power, now crackled with a different, almost frantic energy. Maps of the city sprawled across the vast glass table, overlaid with legal documents and grainy surveillance photos. The air felt charged, humming with unspoken urgency. Julian stood by the panoramic window, his back to her, a dark silhouette almost swallowed by the city's pre-dawn glow reflected in the glass. He turned as she entered, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that offered no easy answers, only a mirror of her own dawning dread. "It's sophisticated," he stated, his voice unnervingly low, almost calm. That composure, like a predator assessing its prey, made it more terrifying than any outburst. "Someone knew exactly where to strike," he continued, "how to weave a web of plausible deniability. It's too precise for a random competitor." Nausea churned in Olivia's stomach, making her grip the edge of the glass table. She knew, without needing to be told, who was behind this. Marcus. Or someone moving in his lingering shadow. The stakes weren't just financial. They felt personal, threatening to swallow her whole. This project was a cornerstone of Julian's current strategy, and by extension, her own precarious foothold back in the industry, a foothold she'd fought tooth and nail to reclaim. "What are our options?" she asked, her voice thin, forcing a steadiness that felt brittle even to her own ears. Julian walked over to the table, his fingers tracing a precise line across a blueprint. "Legally, we're tied up for months, maybe years. The opposition has deep pockets and a clear agenda to bleed us dry." He looked up, his gaze piercing, unwavering. "We could fight it, play by their rules, and lose everything in the process." This wasn't the kind of battle she was equipped for, not with her old rulebook, the one she'd tried so hard to live by, the one that had already failed her once. She thought of Alara, her loyal assistant, and the worried glance she'd received after the last creative solution Olivia had engineered. This is temporary, for survival, she'd told herself then, a quiet lie. Now, survival seemed to demand something far more drastic, something that would leave a deeper mark. Her options dwindled, like sand slipping through an hourglass. Later that day, in the hushed, almost sterile confines of a private meeting room, the atmosphere grew heavier, pressing down on her shoulders. The air conditioning hummed, a low, constant drone. Dominic Hayes' name surfaced. Not directly implicated, but his firm had been quietly sniffing around the waterfront project for weeks. Olivia knew his ambition, his cold ruthlessness. He was the kind of man who would smile while watching a rival drown. He'd relish seeing them fail. A sudden, absurd thought pricked her. Had she remembered to feed the cat this morning? She made a series of increasingly frantic calls, trying to leverage old contacts, to find a loophole, a back door, anything. Each one led to a dead end, a polite but firm refusal, a cold reminder of her tarnished reputation. The city outside, usually a source of inspiration, now felt like a suffocating vice, its grid of distant lights blurring into a dizzying smear. Her breath grew shallow. Julian watched her, silent, observant, his gaze unlinking. He let her exhaust every conventional avenue, every ethical path, every scrap of her old self before he finally spoke. "There is another way," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, yet it cut through the room, sharp and final like a blade. "It's not clean, it's not legal in the traditional sense, but it will work." Olivia's breath hitched, a small, sharp gasp. She knew, with a sickening certainty, what he was asking. She saw the shadow of the line, stark and unforgiving, the one she had sworn she would never cross again. But the alternative was ruin, not just for Julian, but for her own desperate, clawing climb back to relevance. A cold dread seeped into her bones. Her mind raced, calculating the risks, the rewards. The stain on her soul, already a faint bruise, seemed to deepen. What was a soul worth, she wondered, if you had nothing left to live for? The unspoken weight in the air grew thick, suffocating. The air in the discreet, unmarked office was heavy, charged with unspoken possibility. A single lamp cast long, distorted shadows across the sparse walls. Olivia's ears picked up a faint, almost imperceptible hum from the fluorescent fixture above, a sound she hadn't registered until now, but which suddenly filled the silence. Julian stood opposite her, his expression unreadable, waiting. There was no grand speech, no impassioned plea, just the quiet, immovable weight of his expectation. He didn't even wait for her to fully meet his gaze, already knowing the answer. "Are you in, Olivia?" he finally asked, his voice flat, simply stating a fact, an inevitable conclusion. She looked at him, at the unflinching resolve in his eyes, the dangerous ambition that mirrored her own, now fully unleashed. Her mouth felt parched, words like ash on her tongue. But the decision had already been made, deep in her gut, a cold, undeniable certainty. She nodded, a single, definitive movement. Her throat felt constricted, arid. "Yes," she whispered, the sound barely audible. I'm in." Julian gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod in return. Then he laid out the specifics: a carefully orchestrated leak, a falsified document, a strategic manipulation of zoning laws through a compromised official. Each detail felt like a stone dropping into a deep, dark well. Each word, a nail hammered into her conscience. This wasn't just about Julian. It was about the woman she was becoming, or perhaps the woman she had always been, merely hidden beneath layers of decorum. She picked up the phone, her fingers trembling slightly, and made the call. Her voice, miraculously, was steady as she dictated the instructions, despite the storm raging inside her. The recipient on the other end, a voice she barely knew, confirmed the task with chilling, almost mechanical efficiency. A cold, hollow sensation settled in her chest, an empty space where something vital used to be. She had done it. She had actively participated in an act that shattered her own moral compass. There was no going back now. A faint, distant siren broke the oppressive silence, wailing somewhere far below, a mournful cry in the night. Hours later, the city was a sprawling grid of distant lights below them, the crisis averted, the immediate threat gone. The silence in Julian's office was profound, broken only by the soft, almost imperceptible hum of the building systems. Olivia sat on the edge of a leather sofa, feeling utterly drained, yet strangely invigorated, a buzzing current beneath her skin. The woman who'd walked into this office this morning felt utterly gone, replaced by someone sharper, harder, irrevocably bound to the shadows. She almost didn't recognize herself in the reflection of the vast darkened window pane. Julian poured 2 glasses of a rich amber liquid, the ice clinking softly against the crystal. He offered one to her. Their fingers brushed as she took it, a brief, charged contact, a spark of shared understanding. He didn't say anything about what she'd done. No congratulations, no judgment. He simply looked at her, a deep, knowing gaze that saw past her facade, past any lingering shame, straight into the raw, exposed core of her ambition, and approved. The unspoken affirmation settled deep within her. In that moment, she understood, with a clarity that both thrilled and terrified her. This wasn't just a business alliance anymore. It was something deeper, darker, a shared current running between them. A mutual complicity, a bond forged in desperation and moral compromise, irrevocably binding their fates. Her future, once a carefully charted course, was now inextricably intertwined with his. A dangerous, thrimming, and utterly unforgiving path stretched before them. The glass felt warm in her hand, a silent pact sealed in the quiet, complicit embrace of the night. This was the price of power, she realized, a bond that offered no escape, only deeper immersion. The city lights twinkled below, indifferent witnesses, as the first tendrils of dawn began to paint the distant sky, signaling the start of a new, grimly determined day. Chapter 8. Echoes of Vengeance. The ghost of the previous night's choice still clung to Olivia, a phantom weight on her conscience. She stared at the glowing screen, its stark light doing little to ease the dull ache behind her eyes. Her makeshift office, a corner of her elegant apartment, now cluttered with files and half-empty coffee cups, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a war room. Sleep had eluded her. Her stomach rumbled faintly, a forgotten protest against the urgency of her self-imposed investigation. She really needed to water her plants, she thought, a mundane detail that felt absurdly out of place. The morally ambiguous decision she'd made had solidified something within her, a hunger for the truth of Marcus's deception that overrode even her own survival instinct. Hours blurred into a relentless pursuit. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, cross-referencing old financial statements with property deeds and obscure corporate filings. A name jumped out at her, buried deep in an old land registry document she'd almost overlooked. It was a property Julian had mentioned once, a long-lost asset of his family's, acquired through a forced sale years ago. The date of the transaction made her skin prickle. It coincided precisely with the period Julian's family business had crumbled. She leaned back, her chair groaning in protest. The true scale of Marcus's corruption began to emerge, vast and chilling. This wasn't just opportunistic fraud, it was targeted destruction. A quick, discreet call to Alara confirmed her suspicions, though Alara's tone was laced with a concern Olivia couldn't quite decipher. The pieces clicked into place, a grim, undeniable pattern. Marcus hadn't merely profited from their misfortune, he had orchestrated it. The revelation stole the air from her lungs, leaving a hollow ache where her certainty used to be. She had known Marcus was corrupt, a liar, but this was a calculated, brutal act of corporate assassination, and it was Julian's family who had paid the price. A new kind of resolve settled over her, chilling and precise. She had to tell Julian. The thought of his face when he heard it, the grim satisfaction mixed with old pain, twisted her stomach. Would he see her as an ally, or merely another bearer of bad tidings? The cost of this knowledge, she realized, would be immense for them both. The bitter realization settled, a cold knot in her stomach. The drive to Julian's office was a blur of city lights, her mind racing with 100 different scenarios. She almost missed her turn onto the main street, her focus so entirely on the coming confrontation. The air in his penthouse office was always heavy with unspoken power, but tonight it felt charged, expectant. She found Julian standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a silhouette against the city's sprawl. The distant lights blurred into a haze of gold and gray, mirroring the chaos in her own thoughts. He didn't turn immediately, as if sensing the weight of her news before she even spoke. "I found something," Olivia said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in her hands. She laid the printouts on his sleek glass desk, the damning evidence stark against the polished surface. "Marcus, he didn't just capitalize on your family's fall, he engineered it." He turned. His eyes, dark and sharp, reflected the city's glow. No surprise registered there, only a grim confirmation of a truth he had likely always known, a suspicion finally given form. His jaw tightened. "Tell me," he commanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Olivia hesitated, then detailed her findings. She traced the paper trail, the shell corporations, the manipulated market data, and the aggressive takeover of his family's most valuable assets. As she spoke, the rigid control around him seemed to fray, revealing the raw, unhealed wound beneath. "He systematically dismantled everything you had," she finished, her voice thick with a newfound understanding of his pain. A faint scent of his cologne, something sharp and expensive, reached her, momentarily distracting her from the gravity of her words. It was a scent that spoke of ambition and a certain ruthless elegance. A heavy silence settled, thick with unspoken grief and a dangerous understanding. Julian walked to the desk, his gaze sweeping over the documents. "My father," he began, his voice rough with suppressed emotion, "he built that company from nothing. Every brick, every beam, a testament to his vision. Marcus, he didn't just take our business. He took our name, our future. He took my father's will to live." His hands clenched into fists, the knuckles white against his dark skin. The air conditioning hummed, a low, steady drone, doing little to cut through the sudden chill in the room. Olivia felt a fierce pull, a current of fury drawing her closer. The moral lines she once held so dear blurred, fading into insignificance against the backdrop of such profound injustice. Her own rage at Marcus, once a simmering resentment, now sharpened into a cold, hard edge, fueled by Julian's anguish. "He deserves to pay," she whispered, the words surprising even herself, tasting like ash and iron. She barely recognized the woman speaking. Julian finally met her gaze, and in his eyes she saw not just pain, but a reflection of her own burgeoning ruthlessness. "You understand now," he said, his voice barely audible, yet vibrating with an intensity that pulled at something deep within her. He stepped closer, closing the small distance between them. The air thrummed with unspoken desires, with a shared purpose forged in betrayal and vengeance. She noticed a faint scar above his left eyebrow, a detail she hadn't registered before, a small, almost imperceptible imperfection on an otherwise perfect canvas. "More than you know," Olivia replied, her breath catching in her throat. She could feel the heat radiating from him, the dangerous allure of his proximity. The truth of Marcus's treachery had not only aligned their goals, but had stripped away the last vestiges of her resistance to Julian, to his world, and to the undeniable current flowing between them, pulling her under. She wondered if she'd ever truly wanted to resist at all. He reached for her, his hand gently cupping her jaw, his thumb tracing the line of her cheek. The touch was a silent claim, a spark against her skin. In that moment, the world outside their shared vendetta ceased to exist, replaced by the charged silence of their connection. Olivia knew with a cold certainty that she was truly lost to his world now, bound by a desire as potent as their shared need for retribution. The echoes of vengeance had brought them together, forging a dangerous, unbreakable bond, one that felt both terrifying and utterly right. But even as the heat of his touch lingered, her mind, sharp and newly honed, was already turning to the architecture of their revenge, to the intricate designs that would bring Marcus to his knees. The first move, she realized, was already forming, clear and precise, in the cold, exhilarating space between them. Chapter 9. Setting the Trap. The air in Julian's private study hung thick with the scent of old leather, a tension humming beneath the surface of their focused silence. Olivia traced the complex lines of a digital blueprint projected onto the wall, her finger, slightly chilled, hovering over a critical intersection. A different kind of design now, she thought, the precision familiar, the purpose chillingly new. Julian watched her, his expression unreadable, a silent challenge in his steady gaze. Adrenaline, a familiar surge, hummed beneath her skin, a quiet, almost cold resolve settling deep in her gut. She shifted in the heavy armchair, the scratchy fabric a minor distraction, yet it couldn't quite pull her focus from the intricate web on the screen. "It needs to be subtle," Julian stated, his voice a low rumble that cut through the quiet. He paused, a finger tapping lightly on his chin. Something they won't see until it's too late, but undeniable once it's revealed. Olivia didn't just nod. Her mind was already racing, sifting through possibilities. Her architectural instincts, once honed for pure creation, now twisted towards manipulation, a sharp, unexpected tool. She moved closer to the projection, highlighting a section of the old financial district, a maze of interconnected properties Marcus had once controlled. Funny how some of these digital representations still carried the faint ghost of stale coffee and desperation, she thought, a phantom scent from a past she was dismantling. "The flaw in Marcus's design was always his arrogance," she murmured, almost to herself, her gaze fixed on the glowing map. "He built layers, thinking no one would ever peel them back. But every layer is a weakness if you know where to apply pressure." Julian stepped beside her. His proximity offered a familiar warmth, yet it was still charged with an unspoken intensity. "And you know where to apply it." A flicker of something unreadable crossed Olivia's face, a ghost of her former self, perhaps, grappling with the woman she was becoming. It was a fleeting, unpleasant taste, like biting into something rotten, but she swallowed it down. Her jaw tightened. "We target the core," she began, her voice gaining strength, "the nexus of his shell corporations. The property itself is insignificant, but its history is a roadmap." She outlined the strategy, detailing how a seemingly innocuous renovation project could be used to expose hidden financial links. Julian listened, his gaze fixed on her, absorbing every detail. "The bait needs to be irresistible," he interjected, "something Marcus's lieutenants can't afford to ignore, yet something that, when touched, unravels everything." Olivia considered this, then pointed to a specific dormant property on the map. It was a forgotten warehouse, part of an early Marcus Harper development. "This one. It's unassuming, but its original deeds link back to a trust that was instrumental in his early dealings. If we can force a public interest in its redevelopment, we can draw out the beneficiaries." The brainstorming continued for hours, fueled by strong, now lukewarm coffee. Olivia's stomach rumbled once, a quiet protest, but she ignored it, lost in a shared, almost predatory focus. They moved from broad strokes to minute details. Julian provided the logistical muscle and network access. Olivia, in turn, wove the intricate web of deception, twisting her profound understanding of urban planning and corporate structures into a weapon. A strange exhilaration hummed through her, a dark satisfaction. This wasn't just revenge for Julian, it was her own reclamation, a way to dismantle the empire that had nearly destroyed her. The risk is substantial, Julian warned, his voice grave, as they reviewed the projected outcomes. He looked up from the screen, his eyes meeting hers. If they catch wind of our true intentions, they'll vanish, or worse, retaliate. Olivia met his gaze, unflinching. They won't, not if we make the lure tempting enough and the trap subtle enough. It has to look like an opportunity, not an ambush. She described how a seemingly legitimate architectural competition for the warehouse redevelopment would attract attention, forcing Marcus's hidden associates to either stake a claim or reveal their disinterest. Both options would provide valuable intelligence. As the final details were discussed, a palpable tension settled. Outside, the city lights began to blur as night deepened, and a thin, cold rain started to tap against the glass. The plans lay spread across the table, a complex arrangement of legal loopholes, financial incentives, and carefully orchestrated public relations. A tremor of unease snaked through her, a fleeting thought of the ethical lines she was not just blurring, but actively crossing. What would her old mentor say? The image of his disapproving frown flashed in her mind, a ghost from a life she no longer recognized. But then she remembered the wreckage of her own life, the betrayal, the public humiliation, and the resolve hardened. This was the only path forward. We need a strong public face for the competition, Julian mused, tapping a finger on the blueprint. Someone respected, yet easily manipulated by the right kind of incentive. Olivia immediately thought of Dominic Hayes, Marcus's protege and her former rival, a man whose ambition often outstripped his caution. Dominic Hayes, she stated, a sharp edge to her voice. He'll jump at the chance to publicly redeem the district and associate himself with a high-profile project. He's predictable, and his ego is our greatest asset. Julian raised an eyebrow, a slight frown creasing his forehead. Hayes? Are you sure? He's a viper. Olivia nodded, a grim smile. Precisely, and he'll be our unwitting pawn. Over the next few days, their plan began to coalesce. Olivia meticulously drafted the competition parameters, embedding subtle triggers and data collection points within the seemingly innocent project brief. She designed the architectural bait itself, a detailed conceptual redevelopment plan for the old warehouse. It promised immense profit and prestige, a vision so compelling it would be impossible for anyone connected to Marcus's legacy to ignore. She chose materials, drafted initial renderings, and even selected the specific site within the old warehouse district where the groundbreaking would supposedly take place, knowing it was riddled with surveillance points Julian's team had installed. She'd seen a pigeon nesting in one of the old ventilation shafts there, completely oblivious to the eyes it housed. The day came to finalize the launch of the competition. Olivia stood with Julian on a high vantage point over the city, the sprawling urban landscape a chessboard beneath them. The wind whipped around them, carrying the distant hum of the metropolis, a sound that seemed to hum with anticipation. She noticed a faint metallic tang in the air, sharp and clean like ozone after a storm, yet somehow also heavy with unspoken promise. It's set, Olivia said, her voice barely audible above the wind, but firm. The call for entries goes out at dawn. Hayes will be the first to bite. A profound sense of power settled over her, but also a chilling awareness of the precipice they stood on. Julian turned to her, his eyes dark and intense. Once the first piece moves, there's no turning back. Olivia held his gaze, a silent acknowledgement of the danger, the shared purpose, and the undeniable bond forged between them in this morally fraught endeavor. The last adjustment made, the trap was finally set. The metallic tang in the air seemed to sharpen, a premonition of the stale, charged atmosphere they would soon inhabit. Their lives, and perhaps their future, now hung in the balance, waiting for the first unsuspecting move to echo in the silence. Chapter 10. The Reckoning. The air in the derelict warehouse hung heavy, thick with the scent of dust, decay, and a metallic tang like old blood, vibrant with unspoken expectation. Olivia stood beside Julian, the silence between them a taut wire stretched across the vast, echoing space. Her gaze swept the skeletal remains of what once Marcus's ambitious, albeit illicit, storage facility. A ghost of his past, a place Julian had chosen for reasons she understood all too well. Julian's presence was a solid anchor beside her, his stillness almost unnerving, yet the faint scent of his leather jacket offered a strange comfort. The very air felt charged. A distant hum, barely perceptible at first, began to vibrate through the concrete floor. It grew steadily, resolving into the unmistakable growl of a powerful engine. Olivia's breath hitched. A cold knot tightened in her stomach, but beneath it, a frantic, almost guilty exhilaration pulsed, fighting the fear. This was it, finally. The hum became a roar, then abruptly cut out, plunging the exterior into an unsettling silence once more. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, approached the main entrance, their rhythm uneven. Julian's hand found hers in the darkness, a brief, reassuring squeeze that grounded her. The heavy door groaned open, revealing a sliver of the city's bruised twilight, the air outside smelling faintly of rain and exhaust. 3 figures, masses of shadow against the fading light, stepped into the cavernous space. One of them, a man Olivia recognized from Marcus's periphery, held a small, powerful flashlight, its beam skittering nervously across the shadows. Defiance stiffened Olivia's spine. This wasn't just Julian's vengeance anymore. It was hers too, a chance to expose the rot Marcus had spread, to reclaim something. She moved slightly, a deliberate shift that caught the flashlight beam for a fraction of a second. A sudden movement drew all eyes. The beam steadied, fixing first on Olivia, then on Julian. A low curse escaped the lead associate's lips. Julian stepped forward, his voice, low and dangerous, cut through the thick air. The associates exchanged nervous glances, their posture tightening. One of the men, younger and more impulsive, lunged forward. Julian moved with a brutal, almost clinical efficiency Olivia had only glimpsed before, a blur of controlled force. A sickening thud echoed, and the man crumpled. The air thickened, suddenly heavy with the metallic tang of fear and the aftermath of violence. The remaining 2 associates hesitated, their bravado evaporating. Olivia's pulse quickened, a frantic drum against her ribs. She observed their positioning, the building schematics flashing in her mind, the weaknesses she and Julian had mapped out. A rusted, precarious staircase on the far wall, a hidden maintenance tunnel beneath a loose floor panel. The implication settled, heavy and cold. The lead associate, recovering his composure, pulled the glint of a weapon from his jacket. Julian instinctively moved to shield Olivia, his body a formidable barrier. Olivia's voice, though quiet, was sharp with urgency, a command that drew on her architectural memory. The lead associate, momentarily distracted by Julian, fired. The bullet ricocheted off a metal beam with a deafening clang, sending sparks flying. Olivia didn't flinch. Her eyes were locked on the precarious staircase. A risky play, but their only shot. Now! Olivia shouted, her voice cutting through the ringing in her ears. She pointed to the rusted staircase, a derelict structure Marcus had let crumble. Julian, catching her meaning in a split second, launched himself at the remaining associate, forcing him back, creating a crucial window. Olivia scrambled onto the first rung, the metal groaning ominously under her weight. The lead associate, seeing her move, snarled, turning his weapon towards her. A second shot rang out, closer this time, splintering wood just inches from her head. Before the echo died, Julian, with a primal roar, tackled the associate, sending them both crashing into a stack of discarded crates. The weapon skittered across the concrete floor. Olivia, remembering the building's structural weaknesses, kicked hard at a corroded support beam near the base of the staircase. The entire structure shuddered, dust raining down. The lead associate, momentarily stunned by Julian, found himself pinned by falling debris as the staircase began to give way. Julian pulled Olivia from the collapsing structure just as it gave, with a tremendous crash, sending up a cloud of dust and metal, effectively trapping the man beneath. They fell together, a tangle of limbs amidst the settling dust. Olivia coughed, pushing herself up, her gaze immediately seeking Julian's. His eyes, usually so guarded, were alight with a fierce, protective gleam, and a flicker of something else, raw, undeniable relief, almost a gasp of it. Their faces were mere inches apart, the adrenaline-fueled moment stripping away all pretense. The trapped associate, groaning, spat out a name, then a stream of desperate words that tore away the last illusions about Marcus. The full, horrifying truth of Marcus's disappearance, his corruption, the network he controlled, it all spilled out in the dust-choked air. He hadn't just fled. He'd orchestrated a far more sinister game, disappearing into the shadows after betraying everyone, even his own inner circle. Julian's vengeance, a cold, calculated drive, finally had its true target. The sirens wailed in the distance, a harsh reminder of the world outside their dust-filled bubble. The dust settled slowly, revealing the wreckage, the incapacitated associates, and the sudden, ringing silence that followed such an explosion of chaos. Olivia and Julian remained on the floor, their bodies still close, the heat of the battle fading into a different kind of warmth. The woman who had entered this warehouse felt distant, a memory. In her place was someone sharper, more formidable, forged in the crucible of Julian's world. She looked at Julian, truly looked at him, and saw not just a vengeful magnate, but a man who had stood by her, protected her, and somehow challenged her to become this. His voice was a low rumble, a weight that settled deep within her. The unspoken question hung between them, heavy with consequence. The path of retribution was closed, but the path forward, together, was just beginning to unfold, uncertain and wide open. Julian reached out, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw, a feather-light touch that sent a shiver, then a slow burn through her. Their eyes met, a silent language passing between them, the culmination of months of tension, danger, and an undeniable pull. It wasn't love in the traditional sense, not yet, perhaps never. But it was something far more potent and complex, born of shared shadows and mutual respect. The wreckage around them was a testament to the destruction of Marcus's empire, the acrid scent of ozone and dust still clinging to the air, a metallic tang of finality. In its ruins, though, a new foundation had been laid, raw and uncertain, yet undeniably powerful. Olivia felt a profound weariness settle deep within her, a physical ache that made her shoulders slump, even as a strange, undeniable pulse of exhilaration thrummed beneath. The city lights, now visible through the gaping hole where the staircase once stood, beckoned, But the path forward was no longer clear-cut. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that the clean, ordered world she had once inhabited was gone, replaced by something far more complex and irrevocably hers to navigate. Chapter 11. Choices and Consequences. The acrid scent of ozone and dust still clung to the air, thick and metallic. Olivia Harper stood amidst the wreckage, surveying fractured concrete and twisted rebar, the very bones of the building laid bare. A profound weariness settled deep within her, a physical ache that made her shoulders slump, her eyelids heavy. But beneath it, a strange, undeniable pulse of exhilaration thrummed, quick and hot. She ran a hand over a splintered railing, the rough wood a stark contrast to the polished surfaces of her past. A tiny sliver bit into her thumb, a sharp, grounding pain. The lingering echoes of shouting and shattering glass seemed to reverberate in the sudden quiet, and for a moment, the city's ceaseless hum felt like a distant, irrelevant thing. She had rebuilt her career, yes, but the cost had been immeasurable. The ethical lines she once held so dear now felt like faint chalk marks on a windy day. This wasn't the clean, ordered world she had once inhabited. A knot of fear tightened in her gut, but a strange, wild thrill pulsed too. She knew she could never truly go back. Hours later, her stomach rumbled, a loud, embarrassing protest against the day's events. The stark reality of the confrontation began to recede, replaced by the quiet hum of her temporary office. The space, meticulously organized by Alara, felt like an echo of her old life, a stark contrast to the jittery energy thrumming beneath Olivia's skin. Alara, her face etched with a mixture of relief and concern, watched her from across the desk. "Are you all right, Liv?" she asked, her voice softer than usual, a fragile thread in the silence. Olivia felt a familiar prickle of defensiveness, a desire to shield Alara from the ugliness she now knew so intimately. She looked away, her gaze distant. "As all right as I can be," she replied. "It's done. Marcus's network is dismantled." Alara sighed, running a hand through her hair. "But at what cost, Olivia? This isn't you." Her voice was quiet, laced with a bewildered sadness. "Not the woman who used to lecture me on integrity and transparency, anyway." Olivia's jaw tightened. Alara's words were a stark mirror, and the woman staring back felt like a stranger. How could she explain the necessity, the power, the strange fulfillment she found in navigating these murky, dangerous waters? The justification felt hollow even to her own ears. Alara, sensing the chasm between them, eventually rose. "Just be careful, Liv." She paused, her eyes searching Olivia's. "This world Julian has pulled you into, it changes people." With a final worried glance, Alara left. The click of the door echoed in the suddenly silent room, a punctuation mark on their growing distance. The evening deepened, the city lights beginning to prickle against a sky bruised violet and orange, when Julian finally found her. He didn't knock, simply appeared in the doorway of her makeshift office, his presence a silent, powerful anchor in the swirling aftermath. He leaned against the frame, his eyes, usually so guarded, holding a rare depth of understanding. "It's over," he stated, his voice a low rumble. "The last threads are cut." Olivia met his gaze, a silent acknowledgement passing between them of the fire they'd walked through. "And you got your vengeance," she added, her voice quiet, testing. "Was it everything you hoped for?" A faint, almost imperceptible shift in his expression. "It was necessary." He pushed off the doorframe, taking a step closer, the air between them charged with unspoken things. "What now, Olivia?" he asked, the question hanging heavy, a silent offer in his eyes. There were no grand words, no declarations, But Olivia understood. He was asking her to stay, to build something new, with him, in this world they had carved out. The thought sent a tremor through her, a mix of apprehension and fierce longing. She saw the glittering edge of a precipice, the dizzying drop of her old life. Could she truly step into this unknown, this partnership forged in shadow and shared purpose? A profound, complicated desire, forged in fire and shared purpose, surged through her, a hot current beneath her skin. Their eyes locked, a silent understanding, a future that defied labels, maybe. Now, Olivia breathed, her voice barely a whisper, I choose. He nodded, a subtle shift in his gaze, then turned and walked towards the panoramic window, his silhouette becoming a stark outline against the sprawling metropolis. Olivia watched him, her own thoughts a whirlwind. The city, once a gilded cage, now felt like an extension of her own burgeoning power, a vast, complex thing she could finally grasp. She had shattered her old life, yes, but she had also forged a new one, harder and more authentic. The woman she had been, the one who craved perfection and rigid ethics, was gone. In her place stood someone else, someone shaped by fire and betrayal, by ambition and a forbidden passion. This new self felt sharper, honed. She could not go back. The thought brought not despair, but a quiet, fierce sense of liberation, like shedding a skin that no longer fit. The lights of the city glittered below, a vast, complex web, and Olivia knew she belonged to it now, not as a victim, but as a force. The weight of her choice was heavy, but undeniably clear, a conviction that settled deep in her bones. She began to walk towards him. Chapter 12. A New Foundation. The city sprawled beneath her, a glittering expanse of ambition and compromise. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Olivia Harper saw it with a startling, almost painful clarity. The choice, once a torment of should and must, now resonated with a quiet, undeniable conviction. She had decided. She had walked through the fire, shed the brittle skin of her former self, and emerged not unscathed, but undeniably forged anew. The pristine, unblemished architect who once meticulously planned every detail of her perfect life was gone, replaced by someone bolder, sharper, and profoundly more real. The city lights, once a source of quiet inspiration, now mirrored the complex, glittering drive that burned within her. A faint, metallic tang, like ozone after a summer storm, seemed to hang in the air, or perhaps it was just in her head. The office, high above the bustling streets, felt less like a cage and more like a command center. The air hummed with a quiet intensity, a stark contrast to the chaos below. Julian Reese stood by the panoramic window, his silhouette stark against the urban sprawl, a silent, powerful presence that had become as integral to her new reality as the air she breathed. She approached him, a lightness in her step she hadn't known she possessed in years, though her heels still pinched a little at the arch. "It's done," she stated, her voice steady. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor tried to surface, a ghost of old habits, but she quickly suppressed it. Julian turned, his gaze intense, searching, as if trying to read the deepest recesses of her soul. "The decision?" he prompted, his tone low, measured. "The decision to stop pretending," Olivia replied, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. "To stop trying to fit back into a mold that was never truly mine, and certainly isn't now." She embraced this new, formidable version of herself. She thought of the whispers, the judgmental glances, The doors that had slammed shut in her old world, they held no power over her anymore. Yet, the memory of Marcus's sneer still pricked at the edges of her resolve, a tiny, persistent barb. Julian nodded slowly, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Approval, perhaps, or a deeper understanding she was only beginning to grasp. He shifted his weight, the leather of his shoe squeaking faintly on the polished floor. "And what does that mean for us?" he asked, the question hanging in the air, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Olivia met his gaze, unflinching. "It means a new foundation, Julian, one we build together on our terms." She saw the subtle tension in his shoulders ease, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Their alliance, born of necessity and vengeance, had evolved into something far more intricate, something that defied easy categorization. It wasn't the conventional romance she once might have envisioned for herself, but it was undeniably real, forged in the crucible of shared danger and ambition. This, she realized, was her truth. As the initial discussions concluded, a new energy filled the space. The days that followed were a flurry of activity, yet imbued with a sense of purpose Olivia hadn't experienced before. The office buzzed with a focused intensity. Blueprints spread across tables, screens glowed with intricate designs. Plans were drawn, contracts reviewed, and strategies refined. All this for the ambitious new project that would become the physical manifestation of her transformation, a towering, audacious structure designed to challenge architectural norms and redefine the city's skyline. Ilara, her loyal assistant, still watched her with a mixture of awe and concern, a silent reminder of the ethical tightrope Olivia now walked. "Are you sure about this, Liv?" Ilara had asked one evening, poring over schematics that bent zoning laws to their absolute limit. "It's a lot." Olivia had simply smiled, a genuine, knowing smile that held a hint of something sharp. "More sure than I've ever been, Ilara. This isn't just a building, it's a statement." This project was her declaration of independence, her defiance made manifest. She recognized the risks, the inherent moral ambiguity of their methods, but she no longer saw them as insurmountable obstacles. They were simply part of the landscape, challenges to be navigated with cunning and conviction. Julian, for his part, offered no grand pronouncements. He remained a quiet, observant force, his presence a constant, unwavering anchor, a silent acknowledgement of her capabilities and her newfound resolve. He would often appear in her office late at night, not to dictate, but to observe, to offer a concise thought, or simply to share the quiet space, the unspoken understanding between them deepening with each passing moment. One such evening, as the city lights blurred into a distant haze, Olivia had traced a complex structural element on a digital blueprint. "This particular cantilever," she murmured, "it pushes the boundaries of what's considered feasible, aesthetically and structurally." She wondered if the janitor on the 40th floor of the building across the street ever felt lonely, cleaning offices while the city slept. Julian's reflection in the glass, superimposed over the cityscape, offered a rare, almost tender smile that barely touched his lips. "Boundaries are meant to be pushed, Olivia, especially when the old ones were built on lies." His words resonated deeply, confirming the shared philosophy that now bound them. It wasn't just about vengeance anymore. It was about building something new, something real from the wreckage of the past. The following dawn brought the first tangible progress. The day of the groundbreaking arrived with a crisp autumn chill that bit at her exposed skin, a perfect counterpoint to the warmth of anticipation that hummed through Olivia. The site, once a derelict industrial plot, was now a hive of controlled activity. Dignitaries, investors, and a smattering of curious press gathered, their murmurs a low hum against the rumble of heavy machinery. Olivia stood a little apart from the main group, clad in a sleek, powerful suit that felt less like armor and more like a second skin. This wasn't just another project, it was her testament, her bold signature etched into the very skyline of the city. Julian moved through the crowd with an easy, proprietary grace, his presence commanding respect and a healthy dose of apprehension. He caught her eye across the throng, a silent exchange passing between them, a promise, a challenge, a shared destiny. The speeches began, a procession of platitudes and veiled references to overcoming adversity. Olivia listened with half an ear, her focus already on the earth beneath her feet, on the steel and glass that would soon rise. She noticed a woman in the front row wearing a bright orange scarf, adjusting her glasses every few seconds. Then it was her turn. She stepped onto the makeshift podium, the cool air invigorating her. The microphone felt solid in her hand, a conduit for her vision. "We stand here today not just to break ground on a building, but to lay the foundation for a new era," she began, her voice clear and resonant, a slight catch in her throat quickly swallowed. She spoke not of the past, not of Marcus, nor of the scandal that had nearly consumed her. She spoke of innovation, of resilience, of a future built on strength and unyielding purpose. Her words, sharp and articulate, cut through the polite murmurs, capturing the attention of every person present. Julian, standing at the edge of the assembly, watched her, a subtle, almost imperceptible pride in his posture. As her speech concluded, the applause was not merely polite, it was enthusiastic, a genuine acknowledgement of her power. She descended from the podium, a single, polished shovel waiting. This was the moment. She gripped the handle, its coolness a stark contrast to the resolve burning in her veins. The shovel, gleaming under the autumn sun, represented both destruction and creation. Julian stepped to her side, his presence a quiet anchor. Their hands brushed, a fleeting, electric contact that spoke volumes without a single word. It was a silent promise, a confirmation of their partnership, their shared future. Olivia plunged the shovel into the earth, the rich soil yielding with a satisfying crunch. The flashbulbs popped, capturing the disgraced architect, now reborn, breaking ground on her new empire. She lifted a clod of earth, dark and fertile, and held it up, not with triumph, but with a profound sense of peace tinged with a fierce, almost predatory satisfaction. This was not redemption in the eyes of her old world, but a far deeper, more personal victory. This was the acceptance of her own power, forged in the gray, built on a foundation of truth and unwavering ambition. Julian's gaze met hers, a silent, powerful connection that acknowledged the depth of their entanglement, the complex, undeniable desire that pulsed beneath the surface of their partnership. Later, as the crowd dispersed and the last of the media vans pulled away, Olivia stood alone on the site, the vast expanse of the city stretching out before her. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, casting long shadows across the nascent foundation. She looked out, not with regret for the pristine, predictable life she had lost, but with a quiet strength that settled deep within her bones. The world she now inhabited was messy, dangerous, and exhilarating. She had built it, brick by metaphorical brick, on her own terms, with Julian as her partner, a complex, formidable force by her side. The scent of damp earth and distant diesel hung in the air, the smell of creation, of a future unwritten but firmly in her grasp. A stray piece of yellow caution tape flapped idly in the breeze, a small, forgotten detail in the grand scheme of things.